the witch is an archetype that exists probably in all of us, right? Like finding that piece of ourselves that is the witch has a lot to do with reclaiming what society tells us to banish. Welcome to Soror Mystica, a podcast exploring life's mysteries and magic through its symbols.
I'm Mariana Lewis, an archetypal tarotist.
And I'm astrologer Christina Farella.
And just as the Soror Mystica guided the alchemist through his holy work, we hope to be your mystic sisters in these conversations, guiding you deeper into the symbolic life. Welcome, everyone, to the 21st episode of Soror Mystica. Today, we are covering the witch. Perfect in time for spooky season. So before we jump into it, if you haven't yet, leave us a review wherever you're listening to this podcast, because we're growing. I think at this point we're almost at 100 reviews or ratings or whatever on Spotify, which is really wonderful and special to see that people are actually listening.
It's true. And it's nice to know that we're not just talking to ourselves like we usually do, because that's what a phone call's for. And so it's good to know people care. So thank you.
People care. Yes. So thank you very much. And if you haven't yet, we would greatly appreciate it. This is going to be an extraordinary episode, as we say every time, but it's going to be even more so because the witch is very special to us both. Very special to, I think, a lot of people out there. So we're going to really get into the depths of her symbolic and archetypal resonance, and it's just going to be so interesting. I'm very excited. As always, before we get into it, tell me what you're reading.
I just finished Thought Forms last
night. You
did?
You're ahead of me.
I beat you. I never do. You're always ahead of me.
I'm only on page like 30. I'm behind.
How dare you? Well, it's okay. It's so bizarre. So I'm reading Thought Forms, or I just finished this book called Thought Forms. We're both reading it because we are attending a book club meeting that's organized by Chantal Powell, who is an amazing contemporary artist and scholar, and just like love everything that I have seen from this woman.
She's so great.
So impressive, so exciting. Anyway, Thought Forms is this really wild book from 1905, written by Annie Besant and C.W. Leadbeater.
I think it's Leadbeater, yeah.
Yeah, that's how she pronounced it yesterday. I was like, ooh. But it's a book of theosophy. And so the Theosophists were a very specific spiritual group in the early 1900s. And this book is all about how they believe that emotions create particular shapes, like discernible shapes in one's aura. And so it's just a whole book detailing what these shapes and symbols look like and how clairvoyance can discern, if someone is like yearning for alcohol or actually having a genuine spiritual experience or whatever. There's some that are just totally out there, and it's a really delightful read. You're going to like the last few pages, which are all about the thought forms produced by music. So
I definitely will.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Special.
I'll be honest. I'm a little lost.
Yeah.
A lot.
You just have to roll with it.
I'm rolling with it.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, it's a given, of course. Auras work this way and function like that, and things have mental bodies, and I'm being very curious. I read a little bit to my husband the other day, and he was
it's good to read out loud to people who are like unsuspecting.
Uninitiated. He was like, why do you do this to yourself? And I'm like, no, it's great. I just don't know what's happening, but it's great. It's great.
It really reminds me. Yeah. It reminds me of the movie The Master.
Yes.
It's because it's like that kind of culty, is it Scientology, is it theosophy sort of thing. And there's so many scenes in that film where Philip Seymour Hoffman's like, of course time travel is real. And when we retrieve the soul, this is what it's going to look like. And it's like, I feel like Paul Thomas Anderson read a lot of theosophy to write that movie. So I was like, this is great. It's great.
Yeah, it definitely has that. You got to take the givens as givens, and then it makes beautiful.
We're just not asking questions. We're just saying yes.
We're saying yes. That's it. That's how you do it. So anyway, I am enjoying it, and I'm excited to move through. So that's also what I'm reading.
Cool.
And then I'm also working through The Cloud of Unknowing.
Nice.
which I promised I would read last time. And I think I only started reading because I was listening back to that episode. And I was like, oh, right.
Oh, shoot.
I said I was going to do it, but I am doing it. I'm very happy about it because it is wild and beautiful. This book literally starts with, and if you didn't catch last episode, I was talking about the Cloud of Unknowing. It's a 14th century text written by a British or English monk, anonymous monk. And it's this mystical Christian thing about how to love God and connect with God through love. And it's very interesting. And so it begins with, if you're the kind of person who's going to be skeptical about this, put the book down. It's not for you. Don't read it. Don't you dare read it. It's like very aggressive. And it's like, it's not for you. It's only for you if you believe it already. And so it's very sweet and very, very beautiful and philosophical and right up my alley. So I'm very much enjoying that.
That's cool. There's a passage like that in the beginning of the Picatrix, which is like this really important astrological magic text. And it's the best. It's like, it really feels magical. It's like, reader beware. These are not pages for the uninitiated. And if you have any doubt of the power of astrology or magic, put this book down.
Put it down.
Like, don't return to it. It's like, okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So, all right. So we're reading great things, and let's jump into The Witch. We don't need our symbols book today because we are both very well versed and feel very, very strong about how we start with The Witch. So maybe we can just kind of jump in with what do we feel like is the most, I don't know, essential kind of aspect of The Witch and how we want to approach her today. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that what comes to mind immediately is that the witch is an outsider, but specifically the feminine outsider. And I think that that gives us a really good place to dive into what it means to be a witch or the witch, and what happened to her to make her appear as this kind of banished or exiled or outsider oriented woman in society. So yeah, what would you say?
I think that that's great. And I also, something, whenever I talk about the witch, I have on my website, I recorded a seminar, a class on the witch, on the archetype of the witch a little while ago. If you want to check it out, it's on my website. You can see it and you can get it and stream it right now if you want to. But I started off that seminar saying, the witch is very much a feminine archetype. It's an archetype that belongs to kind of what we understand as the feminine. That doesn't mean that witches are exclusively female. And we know that for a fact. Like in the witch trials, there's many, many documented cases of men being persecuted as witches. There's many men, non-binary people, all people today can identify as a witch. So just as a note, when we talk about the witch today, we are not being exclusive to people who identify as women.
Yeah,
we're talking about
absolutely.
the archetype. Yeah, so we're talking about the ancient form of it, which in stories is always a woman. It really is. We don't really see a male witch. They're usually named something else. They come up with a very different kind of dress and form. And I like that idea of beginning with the outsider, beginning with the exiled expression, because there's something about the witch that is gruesome. And it's why we associate with spooky season, right? We associate this scary time with this image of a woman. And what is the thing that she really does? I mean, it's not like a werewolf who transforms into a big monster. It's not like a vampire who sucks your blood. A witch just has power that you don't really know about. And she probably has some bad intentions. And so she's scary to us just because she has this kind of mystery around her, this malevolence about her that we can't get close to, that she keeps, and she lives on the outskirts, and we'll really never know the extent of that power. And so that's very interesting to me, that we're so scared of her just because we don't really know. We don't really know what she can do to us.
She's the unknown. She's a liminal figure, right? So I think a lot of people will think of Hekate when they think of the witch archetype very naturally, because she's a kind of crossroads guardian, but she's also the patron of witchcraft in the Greco-Roman kind of world. But yeah, witches are people who have the power to heal or to harm. And so that is like their kind of like the pharmacon, they're the kind of sacred encapsulation of of just life and death. But witches, because of something very cool called patriarchy, are personified as women who are revolting, or women who will kill your children or kill your
Mhm.
crops, right? Like that was a lot of what happened during the very famous witch trials
Mhm.
in Europe in the Middle
Yeah.
Ages, of like finding witches because people would be blamed for a crop not growing or cattle dying. And of course, maybe people were hexing their neighbors, but it was, I think it's beyond that. So I also think it's important to say that I have a magical practice of my own and care deeply about the integrity and realness of magic. And I know that Mariana does as well.
Mhm.
And so, occupying that witchy space, I think one of the questions that we want to answer today is like, what does it really mean to reclaim the witch?
Yeah.
Because we have lived through interesting internet times, I will say, where there was
Yeah.
like this big witchy thing that was happening in
Yeah.
like, I feel like it started in 2014 or
Oh,
something
for sure.
on,
Yep.
right? Like a long time
Mhm.
ago. And everyone became obsessed with reclaiming their witchy orientation. But I think we both believe that it's way more complicated than just buying some herbs and lighting candles and stuff like that. So
Mhm.
we want to kind of explore what that really means to both of us and to everybody who is interested in this expression of the feminine.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So that's how we would define the witch, this outsider, this feminine outsider. Yeah.
I think that I want to start maybe with the story of Lilith because I feel like she's a really good example of understanding the witch. And a lot of people know about Lilith. A lot of people don't really know her mythology that well. Her mythology is kind of obscure and all over the place. There's not like a lot of clarity around it. But she is, I like to think of her as kind of like the first witch and the first feminist. Not really, I'm projecting that onto her. But, this is kind of how we can think about this empowered nature of the feminine and its evil or its darkness or its corruption, I should say. So in the story of Lilith, the origins of Lilith actually come from ancient Mesopotamia, Sumeria, that kind of region. If you read the Epic of Gilgamesh, you'll see her reference there. She was referenced as the handmaiden of Inanna, who is the Sky Queen, the great goddess. And so she's kind of like her second in command. And then at some point in the story, do you remember this part in the story? Because we read the Epic of Gilgamesh together, where she's like trapped in the hupulu tree. I think it's or halupu tree. I apologize for not saying that right, which I probably did not either way. But that the like sacred tree that they have, and there's a demon that possesses the tree, and Gilgamesh has to come and excise the demon. And when they
Mm-hmm.
excise the demon, it ends up being Lilith, and
Mm-hmm.
so she goes shrieking out into the night and is like cast out, and she becomes the outsider, right? So we have this image of once the goddess's right hand woman, and now this horrible demoness thing that has to be exiled.
So crazy.
It is. And then we see Lilith again. The way that we think of her now is in the Judeo Christian context. But the story that we think of when we're talking about Lilith comes from this medieval commentary text called the Alphabet of Ben Sirah. And he describes Lilith as the first wife of Adam. And so the story of that goes that God made Lilith and Adam at the same time, the same earth, and they were going to lay together, right, and make children. And Adam said, I have to get on top of you. And she said, no, we're equals. We're made at the same time of the same earth. We are going to be side by side. And he was like, but that's not what this is supposed to do. I'm supposed to be, your husband. And so therefore I'm supposed to be on top. That's what God said. That's what Dad said. I'm the better one. I'm the more important one. And Lilith gets really angry and she's like, no, I'm not going to be secondary to you. I'm not going to be subservient to you. And so Adam gets really mad and he calls God down. He's like, look, the woman that you made is not listening to me. You have to make her more, docile or whatever. And God tells Lilith, you have to listen or else I'm going to have to exile you. And then she somehow knows the unspeakable name of God, which Adam doesn't know for some reason. And she speaks it aloud, and that instantly gets her cast out of the garden. And not only does it get her cast out of the garden, but she becomes this demon. She eats babies. She, births all the demons in the world. She's this horrible witch, terrible person.
Fantastic.
And she gets replaced with Eve, who is the docile version, but still has all
Mm.
of the original sin put upon her, right? And was
Yeah,
made out
poor
of Adam.
Eve.
Yep. So
Yeah.
she loses her agency, but still is the scapegoat.
Mm-hmm.
So it's this interesting story that I really love so much when we're talking about the witch, because we have these more ancient kind of threads that you were talking about, that when we had this sort of turnover into patriarchy about 3,000 years ago, that's when we see this kind of shift in the Epic of Gilgamesh. And I'm not a scholar of like Sumerian literature or anything, but we have this kind of movement from there she is, the right hand maiden, right? The person who is the assistant to the high goddess. And then she's the exiled demoness, right? And so where does that corruption come from? How does that change? And then we also see this reiteration in the alphabet of Ben Sira that says, yeah, and she was powerful, but she would not be subservient. She would not reduce her power for the sake of the man, right? And so she had to, again, become the corrupted witch.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Mm-hmm.
that is definitely one of our more ancient themes that we can pull out in understanding the witch, understanding her origins for sure, is that there's something there about how she is the corrupted feminine that refuses to relinquish her power. She holds her power. She's going to claim that power, own it, and under no circumstance will she soften it or reduce it to make a better relationship with the masculine or the male who's at the top of the patriarchal paradigm, right? That she's
Mm-hmm.
supposed to be subservient to. So that's why she is evil, where she's corrupt because her power does not fit into the patriarchal paradigm as it's
Mm-hmm.
constructed.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is a big theme that I really like the book. I think it's called Masculine Shame from Succubus to Eternal Feminine. I think that's the name of the book. It's by a woman named Mary Ayers. It's not in print anymore, I'm pretty sure, because the world is dumb. But it's a really good book. I got to read it one time when I was working on my thesis. And basically, Mary Ayers theorizes that the refusal to relinquish power necessitated feminine power becoming evil, becoming otherized. And that is how it got kind of reduced and dragged down. And so it's the corruption of it that undermines it,
Mm-hmm.
negates it.
Right.
Yeah. What do you think about all of
Yeah.
that?
And I think that it's so interesting because in all of the stories that we have of witches, if you think about Circe, if you think about Medea, if you think
Mm-hmm.
about Meroe, if you think about any of these figures, they are uncontrollable,
Yeah.
and they often are kind of positioned as people who are going to like do harm to you. And so the idea, I mean, it's obvious to us that the message is that women who can't be controlled or aren't going to fall into that paradigm of subservience are going to be considered rejected and therefore cast in this evil light, which is extremely unfair and damaging and ridiculous. And so I think that considering that the witch is an archetype that exists probably in all of us, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like finding that piece of ourselves that is the witch has a lot to do with reclaiming what society tells us to banish as well.
Yes. Oh, I love the way you put
Um,
that. Yeah.
mhm. Yeah, and so like thinking about the outsider, on a very practical level, witches in at least the Middle Ages were often women who were older,
Mm-hmm.
unmarried, poor,
Mm-hmm.
maybe mentally ill, maybe
Mm-hmm.
physically ill, and therefore cast out of society and easy to pin ridiculous things on, like
Yeah.
the kind of, whatever, death of a crop or something like that. And
Mm-hmm.
it's just constantly been this barrage of, oh, all of these bad things come from this woman, which I do agree with you. Like the root, or a huge root is
Yeah.
that Lilith story. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
the witch, no matter what she does, really, it doesn't even matter what she does. Can we put that label on her? Can we see that energy in her? And I think that that is a thing to draw out too. Marion Woodman and Eleanor Dixon, they are the writers of, the book is called, I think it's just called like The Dark Feminine. Oh, Dancing in the Flames. That's right. I don't know.
Oh yeah, I have that
Talk
on my
about that
shelf
book
here
all the
somewhere.
time. Yeah. And so in that book too, they talk a little bit about the witch, and they talk about how she is just the ultimate scapegoat for all of the shadow, right? Or at least in that time period of like the Inquisition, the witch trials, this time. The patriarchal shadow, what we mean when we talk about that in the shadow in psychology, it's all that we refuse to see, to bring to light. It's all that we keep hidden, usually not intentionally. It's just the thing that if we're too one-sided, we'll of course have the opposite kind of be in the shadow. And so in a patriarchy where the solar god figure is so prominent and so much in the forefront, what's the shadow of that? It's going to be the dark feminine. And so they needed like a real blood and flesh kind of representation of what that dark feminine is, that patriarchal shadow. And so women were the scapegoats for the all that was unresolved archetypally in the collective unconscious, which is why we need to know our shadows, people, so that we don't unconsciously participate in bad things.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, that's super fascinating. And like, if we think about the ways that women or witches show up in stories, if you think about, to take a classical route, a witch like Circe or
Yeah.
Meroe, who is the witch in The Golden Ass, which is a novel by Apuleius, Roman novel. Anyway, they both turn men into animals. They turn them
Yeah.
into pigs or donkeys or whatever, and probably kill them and eat them.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very nonchalant. It's just kind of like, yes, this is my menagerie. Like, right, Circe's story is that she lives alone on an island, and Odysseus and his crew have the bad luck of trying to take shelter on her island without her permission. And she basically winds up turning his crew into animals, but then they have a relationship. So the man they're
Yeah, he's
saved
there for like
anyway.
a year, I think.
Yeah, wait,
Or maybe he's there
that's
for 7 years.
Calypso.
Yeah.
That's yeah. Yeah, he had a lot of detours on his way back to Penelope, so
Yep.
it's fine.
Mm-hmm.
Charming. Anyway, the depiction of women, which is turning men into animals, is like pretty, I would say, like rudimentary. Like the witch is someone who turns the kind of rational into the irrational,
Yeah.
or something like that. I think that this also comes up in a lot of depictions of witches in art in the Middle Ages. There's a really kind of gross and scary etching by Albrecht Dürer from like 1500, and I think it's just called The Witch, and it's just like this hag riding backwards on a goat, and she's terrifying. And so
Mm-hmm.
the concept of inversion, misrule, and reversal is also something really associated with the witch, right?
Yeah.
Witches were also just associated with night instead of day,
Right.
moving backwards instead of forwards, all kinds of topsy-turvy sort of like dreamscape phenomena that are kind of opposed to the solar, right, as opposed to the lunar, the solar masculine.
Yeah.
And I think that it just gets, it is made into an extreme. Another example of this would be the witches' Sabbat, which is where
Mm-hmm.
all of the witches would get together with the devil for a big party, and they would make a mockery of Christian religious rites and have like a fake mass and have a big party, and basically just it was an orgy. And so
Yep.
there's all of this kind of turning order on its head that the witch also gets to do, which I think is one of her more like juicy kind of expressions. I love that about
Yeah,
this
for
symbol.
sure. She has the power to mock and to disturb the kind of I guess male Christian like paradigm. And something that you brought up, bringing up Circe, we do have this kind of duality in the witch archetype that we see. We have the beautiful sort of seductress side of the witch, and then we also have the hag, the other side of the witch.
Mm-hmm.
Both of them, the fundamental thing that kind of unites them is the body, is the sexuality. In the seductress, she is very sexual. She's desirable. It's exactly what happens to Odysseus. He can't say no. And then with the hag archetype, it's disgusting. It's horrible. And yet she usually is still very kind of, she's always got like a jar of phalluses somewhere, you know, like she's always, she's always like there. Like
Well, witches were able to make men's genitalia fall off. That was
Oh
like one of their
yeah.
powers.
Have you ever
Superpowers.
seen the little manuscript image of a witch collecting? I don't want to get vulgar on the show because then we'll be banned somewhere.
Then we'll have to click the explicit box. But yes, I know what you're talking about.
The tree of phalluses, and she's like just plucking them off like they're little fruits.
Yep.
Yeah, they were like, they'd wear them on necklaces, dehydrated, and all sorts of crazy things. It's like amazing. It's so great. But yeah, there's this like other side of the sexualized feminine, which is like grotesque, right? And this is part of that story of like, what does patriarchy, especially Christian patriarchy in Europe, what does that repress into its shadow? And sexuality is a really, really big part of that. And in that book that I mentioned by Mary Ayers, she has this quote. She's talking about the witch's hammer, the Malleus Maleficarum, which you may have heard of before. We'll talk a little bit more about it. But she writes that in it, it's a study in repression and fear of women, the enigma who is both sexually omnipotent and morally weak. Man had no place to put his highly sexual, shamed self that needed to be denied onto the female, those fertile, powerful creatures who menstruate and give birth. These unmentionable sexual fears lay at the root of witch hunting terrorism in general. And then actually in the Malleus Maleficarum, there is this line, all witchcraft is from carnal lust, which in the woman is insatiable. So there is very much this projection or this like kind of shadow thing that happens on the witch. It's like she can't control her lust. She can't control her sexuality, whether she is actually lustful for sex or whether she's just loves the power she has in it. That is a big part of the witch archetype too. And we see that even in Lilith, who's like, I'm not giving it to you if it's not the way I agree to, right? So she does also have that kind of sexual power.
Yeah, we should tell people what the Malleus Maleficarum is.
Yeah, tell us.
So it was a book. It was a witch hunting book written in 1484 by these two reverends, and they were German, and it was in use as a manual for how to identify, hunt, and destroy witches, and it was literally in use for over 300 years. Like it was on, the bench of every judge, every priest had a copy, everybody.
Yeah, it was like one of the most like published books of the medieval era or something, right?
Yeah, it was huge. And so it was used basically as justification for, for the witch hunts, and totally terrifying. I found a good Malleus line in prep for this. And it's very simple. It just says, when a woman thinks alone, she thinks evil. And so if you read through this book, it's absurd. It's absurd talking about women's bodies, talking about how to spot a witch, talking about the behaviors of witches, and then of course what to do with them and how to, how to try them for their crimes. That's the other thing about the witch hunts. They were highly organized and very, very methodical and very legalistic, and very much like using the institution and its structures against, again, disempowered, poor people who couldn't, stand up for themselves. There's a lot of scholarship around the fact that just as, capitalism was beginning, there was a huge peasant uprising all over Europe, and the witch hunt craze was also probably a means of controlling the population and trying to prevent people from rebelling. And so madness and power figures a lot into the actual history of witch hunting and witchcraft, beyond the kind of psychological and psychic kind of implications of the witch. But anyway, Malleus Maleficarum, totally weird. Everyone should look into it. It's It's scary, but it's
It's
really
scary.
interesting.
It is.
It's important. It's important historically.
Very much
Yeah.
so. Something that you said before too, which is when you're talking about how these witches transformed men into animals, and you were saying they took away their logical power, their logos power.
Mm-hmm.
And that is really interesting too, because that is what gives man consciousness, right? Is like, that's what kind of gives him his power, is that he's like, well, I'm conscious and I am rational, and that's what makes me a man and not just an animal, not just a beast. And so she can kind of strip away that illusion that that is where we get our identity from, our humanness from, is just
Mm-hmm.
purely through the intellect and through our rationality. She embraces the irrational completely. In fact, she loves
Mm-hmm.
it. She lives in it. That's how she gets her power. And so there is really something too about that, as you said, like this time period of development of capitalism, at the same time the burgeoning of the Enlightenment era, right? The over exaggeration of the intellect and the rational mind, and then what rises up at the same time is the condemnation of the irrational in this very literal, horrible, gruesome way that is like not rational or fair or logical, right? To just massacre people and to accuse them of witchcraft. And they were rational to them, but completely irrational to us a few hundred years later. We know that was crazy. It's
Yeah.
just very interesting how there's that kind of irrationality was so prevalent and also so warded off and projected onto the witch.
Oh, yeah. I mean, so there's an excellent essay by Barbara Ehrenreich called, it's called Witches, Midwives, and Nurses. It's a 1973 essay. It's definitely like a good kind of like second wave feminism
Mm-hmm.
essay about women and how women are healers. And it kind of traces the arc of women as medicine people in society in pre capitalist situations, and how
Yep.
women were pushed out of the medical field and then demonized and cast out as witches. And so I have this quote here. So Ehrenreich writes, the witch healer's methods were as great a threat to the Catholic Church, if not the Protestant, as her results, for the witch was an empiricist. She relied on her senses rather than on faith or doctrine. She believed in trial and error, cause and effect. Her attitude was not religiously passive, but actively inquiring. She trusted her ability to find ways to deal with disease, pregnancy, and childbirth, whether through medications or charms. In short, her magic was the science of her time. And I
Love
think
it.
that that is great, because what you were just saying is that the kind of fragmented off and projected irrational onto women, onto witches, it's not even a fantasy. It's just not, I mean, I guess it is a fantasy. It's just not true,
Mm-hmm.
because a lot of the medical and kind of like, yeah, a lot of the physicians in their training were kind of guided by the church, a lot of the
Yeah.
men.
Yeah.
And that does not facilitate anything empirical or overtly of the body, right? So women were able to tune in with the body, use their senses, observe, and then prescribe a charm, a spell, an
Right.
herbal whatever thing. So I thought that that was an interesting sort of flip as
Yeah.
well to
Oh,
consider.
I love that. I think that I mean, it's like I'm spinning down a rabbit hole in my brain, but in that medieval period, in that Christian West, the God was reason, right? They were kind of the same idea, is that if you follow reason as perfectly as possible, you get to God. And so this is how we have theology as a practice, right? That's all, pretty much all of philosophy for 1,000 years was theology. It was the understanding of God is how we get the understanding of philosophy. We're trying to understand forms through God, and how we think through God, and how we feel through God. Everything, the perfection of virtue through God, everything comes back to the idea of a God, of a singular God, which is reason. And it's so interesting to me that they were as blind as they were to the fact that that means they're body denying and earth denying, and denying all the actual sensory information that they have around them. That kind of mental connection, logos connection to the divine, is the only thing that's trustworthy. and it denies all the reality that's actually around them. And the witch doesn't. She's like, well, I don't know what God is. God's out there somewhere, maybe. I don't need to think about him for 2 days. I need to test if this herb is going to have the effect that I think it's going to have, and trust what I smell and taste and see and feel and intuit. And these are better pieces of information than anything
Yeah.
that I could sit there and rationalize.
Right. And so I think that, we have kind of charted the, the what is of the witch. We've been thinking about some of her literary expressions and mythic expressions. And so, maybe now we can turn to, I don't know, something about the kind of reclamation of the witch or the
Yep.
psychology of the witch,
Mm-hmm.
whichever sounds good to you.
Well, I think that the reclamation of the witch is very important. Did you also notice that as we've been talking about the witch, I've gone into a dark cloud of the abyss?
Yeah, it's
The
getting dark
entire
over there.
sky has a shadow has fallen upon me. I'm turning on lights. I have summoned her. Yeah, I think that so many people are reclaiming the witch archetype. They're trying to. I was just telling you this little anecdote before we got on, but when I first started my YouTube channel in, I don't know, 2020 or whatever it was, one of the first videos I put together was, "Are you a witch?" Because this is what everyone was putting together. And I was like, I feel like I have a informed perspective on this. And so the basic message of the video is, do you think you are? Do you connect with this archetype? Does this make you feel spiritually aligned? Does it offer you something to claim that for yourself? Then sure, yeah, you are. You don't need a mole. Have you seen these TikTok videos that are you have to look on your right arm on the front part of your forearm, and if there's a little dot, which I have there,
I have
then
one.
you're a witch. Yeah. Then you're a witch. I'm pretty sure everybody has that.
Yeah, that's so stupid. Yeah, no, I haven't seen those, and that's terrifying. And yeah, I think another category was if you had hazel eyes, you would be burned. I have hazel eyeballs, so
You
I
do.
would
They're very
have gone.
beautiful.
Thank you.
They would have burned you. Yeah, I mean, it's that's what people are looking for. They want to know, am I this magical thing?
Right.
And so in my videos, you are if you feel it, if you know instinctively, and yet still, every other day someone comments on this video saying, so am I a witch? How do I know,
As though you have the ability to peer through the screen and find them and be like, it's you. I've chosen you.
They'll give
Yes.
the most random information. They'll be like, I was born on a Friday. Am I a witch?
That's
Or
so sad. No.
I one time saw a ghost. Am I a witch? I'm I don't know. I've never seen a ghost. I don't think so, maybe. But I sometimes think I'm a witch and sometimes not. I think that it's something that can be, you don't have to label yourself if you don't want to, but if it feels like it connects to you, then it connects to you. But we do really, really want to reclaim it. And I think that there's power in that because we're kind of doing that work of reclaiming what has been rejected, right? We're saying she's been exiled. We intuitively know her power. We intuitively know through her stories and the many, many incarnations we've seen of her. Even though she scares us, there's something about especially contemporary women today that are I want that power. I want it. I know it's my birthright. I know I should own it as well. So how do I get that and allow myself to own it? And I think that is really wonderful. And we can all do that. And if you want to do it, that's great. I also want to protect the archetypal integrity of the witch. And that's my Jungian brain always. And I really like this quote by Anne and Barry Ulanov, who are two Jungians, and they wrote a book about the feminine and Jungian psychology. And they write, our great temptation with the witch figure is to approach her with an utilitarian motive, that is to see her in order to change her into some benevolent agent who will benefit us because we understand her properly. Here we approach the witch as if she were really a good mother in disguise, but that will not do. A witch is a witch is a witch. And I don't think that that's to demean her, undermine her, because they continue on in the book to show that she has this power and show that there's this real agency in her. But at the same time, the witch is not the good mother in disguise. We cannot really separate her from that malevolence. And yeah, there's power, there's wisdom, we can think of sort of that medicine witch archetype that you were talking about. And I think that that is kind of a form of that archetype, though maybe a little bit different. It kind of has its own like healing aspect to it. And we're really talking about the witch as we know
No,
her.
you're talking about like Medea, who
Yeah,
killed her children because her
exactly.
husband betrayed her, or Medusa, who is
Hmm.
also totally banished and monstrous but has the powers of transformation. So yeah,
Yeah,
there are different valences of these
exactly.
figures. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so there's a part of me that wants to protect that darkness and say like part of it comes from patriarchal corruption. I believe that. And I also believe part of it comes from just the fact that there is both shadow and light. There's complexity in every archetype, right? There is not just we can't we can't just say we're reclaiming the feminine and all of it is good or powerful or beautiful. We can claim the dark with the light. We don't have to only be good. We don't all have to be good witches. I would certainly not have been a good witch if I was born in Oz. I would have been a bad witch for
I
sure.
would still be your friend. I don't know
You
what
would
kind
be
of
a good
witch I would
witch.
be.
You'd
I
100%
don't
be a
want to
good witch.
be, that's like my Enneagram. I don't want it.
Yeah. You would be a good witch because your heart is very good, and deep down, I think that I could do evil if it was required of me.
This is terrifying. This is like an admission of guilt before the crime. Let's delete this. I'm just kidding. I'm kidding.
Someone will come back and listen to this and be like, "Aha! She
She said it.
she admitted it before she ever
She's a
did it."
witch.
Um, no, I think that we want to keep her power and keep that there is something terrible about it, and I want to save that for her. There's the
Yeah.
instinct in me to save that for her.
Yeah, I totally agree. We can't flatten her and just think that, I mean, to reclaim something that's banished, there's a ton of pain in being banished and being
Mm-hmm.
exiled, I think,
Yeah,
and there's a ton of healing that needs to happen around it, and I don't think that that's easy. I think that working with darker feminine energies is always a startling experience, in my opinion, and
yeah,
you can't underestimate the kind of awesome, scary power of that. And you see that in, the Inanna myth. You see that
mm-hmm.
in Lilith,
Yeah,
certainly in the Medusa myth as well, and Medea. So there's a part of it that because we live in a time that wants everything to be consumable so that we can be sold
yeah,
something,
yeah,
the idea of commodified witchcraft, we want it to be neat and tidy and not messy and having fangs and, you know, gross. So
yeah,
we have to be really wary of that when we're thinking about our relationship to the witch archetype. You are entitled also to have that part of yourself be
yeah,
present and validated. So we don't
yeah.
have to be perfect in that way.
Yeah, I think that a lot of us today want to reclaim the idea of ourselves as witches because we want to reclaim our natural instinct towards magic.
Hmm.
And we want to let that back in as a just like a paradigm of how the world might work. And I think that if this hyper intellectual enlightenment mindset that we've been stuck in for the last several hundred years has taught us anything, is that we can't believe our own rationality. I think we've proved that today in how rational they thought they were being with we need to kill the witches, that'll solve all our problems. And yet there was no
Hmm.
rationality about it. So I think that we want to say, I trust my intuition and my body and my senses and my experience. I trust the little voice in me that has information, and that has the pull to connect more deeply with my own nature. And we want that to be at the forefront. And you can use the word witch to describe that if you want to. I don't think there's anything wrong with that at all. But you also don't have to. I think that a lot of people today, they're in that magical spectrum and then they feel like I now have to call myself a witch or identify as a witch. And they
Mm.
don't really know if they want to be that. And this is just my TED talk saying you can call yourself whatever you feel like is right for you. And you don't have to do one or the other. You also don't have to be embarrassed or feel weird about calling yourself a witch if that's the right term for you. Because, of course, we have reclaimed it at this point as a term that we own,
Yeah.
in modern witchcraft and modern feminist spirituality.
The other thing is though, and it's interesting, like there's an element of witchcraft that implies and necessitates secrecy and
Yeah.
secrets.
Yeah.
And so you don't have to call yourself a damn thing. You can just know
You can just
that
know
this
what you
is,
are.
yeah. I think that that's also important. And there's power in the secret. And I think that that's another message that the witch holds, and that's why she's considered to be so powerful, is because she knows the secrets of the earth, of herbs, of the seasons, of life and death, right? And so all of these things are really important to keep in mind. So you can be secret or you can be public. You can do it
Mm-hmm.
however you want.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I think that, one of the things that is very enticing for a lot of us, and we've kind of said this in a few different ways, so many people are in love with the book Women Who Run with the Wolves by Clarissa Pinkola Estes. And the idea of that book is essentially that we get to be wild again, that we don't have to be so tame. And what does it mean to be tame? It means that we kind of force ourselves to fit this societal expectation of what women look like, of what people look like, of what business owners look like, of what all these things look like. And when we rewild ourselves, which is a term that makes me shiver at this point
You
just because
hate it.
everyone uses it. Like, what does it mean? I was
I
literally
love that
talking to
you
my
hate
husband.
it. It's
I
my
know, of
favorite
course I do.
thing.
I was talking to my husband the other day and I was showing him, I was like, oh, there's this class that looks interesting. It's called Rewilding something. And he was like, what in the world does rewilding mean? I'm like, you're such a boy. I can't believe you've never seen this word before, because I feel like it's everywhere. But we like it so much because what is it? It means that we get to make it revert to our natural state that we choose independently based on our own internal nature. And so we can rewild ourselves. And that's what the witch allows us to do and gives us permission to do. And we claim her. We say, okay, I go back to my true embodied nature. I reclaim my sexuality. I reclaim my body. I reclaim my intuition. I reclaim all these different things. Wisdom, ancient wisdom that's been passed through my lineage. All these things can be ours again, and we don't have to hold shame or fear about it anymore. And I think that's the important thing.
Yeah, it's definitely an answer to like we're in like a post enlightenment moment where,
Yeah.
we are inundated with corporatized information about what's true and what's not. And a lot of us are really unhappy, insecure, don't feel safe. And so people will start reaching for magic. People will
Yeah.
start reaching for what worked on the folk level in the
Mm-hmm.
past. It's just kind of an instinctive thing. And I think that we live in a very sanitized time. I think that we live in a very alienated time. And there is something very precious about reconnecting with not just like nature, but just the ability to conjure, the ability to be in touch with your own essence or your
Yeah.
own power. It's
Yeah.
almost like a way of being an artist, right? It's kind
Yeah.
of like getting in touch with the artist within again.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just a version of it, probably.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah, that's like an important caveat as well. Like, we desire the witch because we are living in a time that's just totally stripped of nutrients. And so
Mm.
the witch is like dense and swampy and has lots of herbs and stones and ideas about how to grow a garden. And, one thing I wanted to kind of touch back in on before we kind of shift is
Mm-hmm.
the idea of trying to make the witch into the good mother.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times the mother archetype for us is, I mean, it's huge. I think it's probably the biggest one of
Mm-hmm.
all of them. She looms so large, and so expecting to get from the witch that which we did not receive, maybe from a mother figure,
Yeah.
is unfair to the witch.
Yeah. She
you
doesn't, she
know,
almost never has children. There's like very
yeah.
few
It's like
instances where she has a kid.
it's the difference between like the high priestess and the empress to me,
Yes.
right?
Yes. Very
Mm-hmm.
much. Mm-hmm. Yeah. The Wizard of Oz shows that really beautifully, right? Like,
Yeah.
there's the good witch who comes and is like, Dorothy, I will take care of you. Glinda, she's so sweet. And then Elphaba, at least in the current version of it, but I don't know what her name is in the Frank Baum
I don't know
version.
either. I read those books when I was a kid. I don't remember,
Can't
but I saw
remember.
Wicked, so it's Alphaba. That's what we're
Yeah,
gonna
it's
go with.
Elphaba. That we'll just do that. But she is the opposite. right? She's the complete opposite, and she's vile, and she's hideous, and she's evil. And they're almost so separate that there's no
Mm-hmm.
redeeming qualities of one, and the other one is far too good and just like doesn't feel real. She's that good.
Aren't they east and west?
Uh-huh.
No, is
Yep.
she the, yeah.
There's
Mm-hmm.
there's actually 4 of them. So I
Yeah.
think that Glinda's the Witch of the
You're
North.
right. She's the Witch of the North. Mm-hmm.
Yes. And
Mm-hmm.
then the Witch of the East is the one who's killed. And then she's the West, and the South one doesn't appear. I don't know what happened to her. Um, it probably appears in the original book. I don't remember.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so they're so polarized that they're these complete opposites of each other. And we want to be careful in leaning too much into the Glinda side that we forget the Elphaba side, or the Wicked Witch of the West side. They're both. They have that duality in it. And we see that in all these stories. In Lilith, right? She's like, I have power. I'll be the first woman. I'll own that, but I also need to own it on my terms. And then, she's willing to give it all up and be evil if that's what she has to do in order to keep her agency. So
Mm-hmm.
there's something to hold about that too.
Yeah. It's that sort of like young seductress, beautiful woman versus like the rejected hag
Yep.
figure. Yeah, it's really interesting how that just echoes every time we pick up a new, iteration of the
It's
witch.
there.
So, mm-hmm.
It's in the collective unconscious. It exists there.
Mm-hmm.
That could be an entire book. Anybody
Yeah.
here wants to write that book, I'll read it. You just let us know. We'll be your proofreaders. we'll very happily do that. Yeah. Okay. So I think that we've done a beautiful job moving through the witch. And of course, this is one of those archetypes that we've avoided for a while because we're like, how in the world do we talk about something so big? But I think we did her some justice today, and we might pick up her story again at some point in the future.
Yeah, I feel like we opened the door here,
Yeah.
and we can definitely pick up threads of like deeper reaching with her in the future. So, yeah, I'm
Yep.
excited. And
Yep.
yeah, cool. Let's talk about a dream.
Let's do it. If you're enjoying this podcast, we encourage you to leave a review or learn more about how you can support us on Patreon, where you can get access to some exciting exclusive offerings. Or you can connect with us by sharing a symbolic experience, whether from a dream or synchronicity, for us to explore on the show. Thank you to today's sharer, and please tell us your symbolic experience or connect with us on our website, sorormysticapodcast.com.
Are you a small business looking to reach a targeted audience of people interested in all things esoteric? If this sounds like you, Soror Mystica would love to invite you to become an ad partner. We offer a highly tailored audience of mindful, curious, depth-seeking listeners, and we would be delighted to showcase your business and offerings to new hearts and new minds. Simply fill out an advertiser application form at our website, linked in the show notes below, or navigate to sorormysticapodcast.com/advertise with us.
Are you a myth and symbol-loving writer with a list of beloved stories that changed your life, but you can't finish one of your own stories to save your life? The Inspirited Word is the podcast for visionary but disenchanted creatives ready to stop second-guessing their storytelling and to rediscover the deep, living magic in their craft. Join writer, editor, and host Mary Lanham on your favorite pod app or at inspiritedword.com. I listen to this podcast myself, and I love it, so definitely check out inspiritedword.com.
On the symbolic life path, we are often looking for images to wear that speak directly to where we are. At Hawk Hummingbird Moon Studio, Dawn Hemstreet creates beautiful, wearable sterling silver and gemstone jewelry that speaks to your soul and your sense of artful adornment. Every piece is diligently handcrafted and designed for each individual stone, creating a story and a home for what that stone is trying to express. Dawn incorporates ancient symbols, dynamic modern shapes, and mythological themes in each artful piece. Pop over to her website, hawkhummingbird.moon.com, to see what new works are available, and follow her on social media for updates at dawnhemstreet.jewelry on IG.
Okay, so today we're actually going to talk about my dream because I had a very interesting dream that had like a very clear symbolic thing to it. And when I dreamed this, Christina was unavailable to be my dream interpreter because she was traipsing around Italy.
How dare I?
How dare she? So now we can talk about it, and I think that it's really rich. So I don't remember it perfectly. I didn't write down for some ridiculous reason, but essentially, I was at the beach with my husband, and we were in the water. I don't even think it was a beach. It might have been like a river or something. We were at some kind of body of water, and we're in the water, and the water is really, really bumpy. It's like a lot of stones and stuff underfoot. And I look down where he's about to step, and he's about to step on this. It looks kind of like a stone, but then I recognize it as a horseshoe crab, which you identified for me because all I could identify it was the ones that are at the zoo that they let you touch. What are they called? I didn't know.
love them. They're so weird.
They're huge. They're like
Yeah.
really big, and they look like rocks. And so I saw that, and I was like, oh my God, don't step on that because that looks like a dinosaur or something. We're not meant to put our feet on that. So that was the first part of the dream. And, I was just in the water myself. And then we left the water and we were walking to our car. My feet really, really hurt. And I looked down, I think it was my right foot. I realized I had 2 crabs attached to my foot. And one of them was like the normal size, just normal crab that you picture. I don't know what any of these crabs are called, so I apologize, people. And then the other one was, I think that one's called a hermit crab, where it's just like in the little teeny little shell.
As a shell. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it's this very tiny one. So, and then we're walking back to the car, and I realize, oh my God, I have these crabs attached to my foot. And I'm like thinking, this is going to be so painful to take this off my foot. And then we do get to the car, and I'm like, ask my husband, take these crabs off my foot. And so he starts doing that, and it's obviously just very painful. And I just kind of wake up because I can't even deal with the discomfort of it. And I'm like so scared because one of them is smaller, and I'm like, that one, he's doing that one. And I'm like, that one's going to be okay. But then the other one is kind of like a bigger thing, and it's like really clamped on. So that was the dream. And I'm very curious about it because 3 crabs, 3 different sizes, all foot oriented. And feet have been, it's so gross. Feet have been a theme for me this summer. My husband broke his foot. I hurt my foot earlier in the summer. It was really not that bad. I got healed pretty quickly from that. But like my sister hurt her foot. Like everybody's hurt their foot. Your partner hurt their foot. Everybody's hurt a foot.
Weird.
Like
You're right.
been a feet thing. And so like this has obviously been a theme going on. I don't know what planet is responsible for the feet situation, but someone feels like
Saturn is in Pisces. Yeah. Well, okay, so just to take an astrological orientation to it, Pisces rules the feet in medical astrology. And
Yeah,
so
there you
what I would be interested in is like, where is Pisces in your chart? For you, it is the 2nd house, which is the house of values and possessions. And
Interesting.
yeah, and so it's almost like maybe if Piscean themes are coming up and Saturn is transiting that house. Saturn is the planet of like restriction and boundaries and heaviness, right? And so you were feeling restricted in your walking, and you were feeling restricted with where you could put your feet in your dream. I think that's got to be some kind of astrological correlation.
Definitely
there.
Felt astrological. I think it was also because the full moon happened while you were away, didn't it? Or was it the new moon?
There was a full. Oh yeah, there was a full moon in Pisces.
It was. It was the second full moon.
That's
it was the
crazy.
blue moon, right? Yeah, I think it was that day.
Wow. Okay, so that's so interesting. And then, obviously, there was a release then between your 2nd house, your 8th house. The 8th house is the house of the soul and shadow. 2nd house is the house of your tangible values. It's a very Taurus Scorpio binary in the chart. And so it might be something about like a rebalancing or kind of like calling into attention what that kind of balance is for you. You're also possessed of a beautiful Cancer moon.
Yeah, that was my first thought.
Yeah, Cancers are crabs. And so there's also a lunar component here that's coming up for you, which is like something about nurture. And I don't know why I felt this, maybe just because I'm like cuckoo, but when you said that the crabs were like attached to your feet, I kind of pictured them as like little like baby crabs, like hitching a ride, like you were like caring for them though? Like they were kind of like, take us with
I wasn't
you.
that bothered by them when I was
Yeah.
walking. I was like, oh, this is going to be annoying to deal with
Yeah. You were
later. But
annoyed, but it wasn't like scary, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
And then like 3 days later, I was like inundated by wasps in another dream. So, I mean, that was
Well,
a lot
that's a whole
scarier.
other thing.
That was a whole other one. But like this one wasn't that bad. This one was like,
Mhm.
okay, well, interesting. Why are they here? And I didn't notice it when I was in the water. And I went to protect my husband from stepping on the big one, which looked scary. So the first thought that I did have was that it, could connect to my Cancer moon and the symbol of the crab being so prominent, and there being this triplicity that happens in
Yes.
the thing. It was interesting because we've talked a lot on this podcast about noticing threes in dreams
dreams,
and
yeah.
the pattern of it. And I almost thought like, did my unconscious just condense them all into one dream? And it was like, here's your 3 crabs. There you go. Like you've worked through this whole little pattern with the crab inside this one dream. I don't know. And I was very
so
interested
crazy.
in the how they got smaller, or there was like this kind of
Yes.
descending. It's almost,
I
I thought
noticed
of like,
that.
what's the little rhyme where it's Goldilocks and the 3 bears, where it's like, I was obsessed with that story when I was a kid. Which I don't know why, now that I'm thinking about it. Why was I so, it's dumb. I feel like I always identified as the one who was just right. And like, I always saw like, someone else is too big and someone else is too small, but I like wanted to be the one who was just right, like not too big or too small. So maybe there's something in there too. But when I was like 3, I remember having that thought, but
Oh,
I don't know.
It's it.
I wanted to fit it. But it is so wild. This idea of the crabs having the connection to the moon, but also being attached, right? Like it can attach, and you can't get it off. You can't let it go. There's something also about on your feet, like you're walking on it, like it's preventing you from being grounded and like having like my feet on the actual ground.
You were also in the ocean. So like you were
Yeah.
coming out of this like protean, creative, generative, feminine space.
Yeah.
And
Especially
you
with that
came
horseshoe
out.
crab that looks like a dinosaur.
The horseshoe crab is so interesting because it's like they're so large, they have such a big shell, and they have that long spine that they sting with. And so that's like way more violent. And then the littler crabs just have their little pinchers in their hands. Crabs also, I share this with people when I'm talking about the Cancer sign, is like crabs, at least the ones that like have the hands, they walk from side to side. They don't march forwards or backwards. They're like sidelong creatures. And so there's this kind of like connection to maybe the circularity of the moon, or moving in a circle, or moving in a direction that's not totally like normal. I'm putting that in air quotes. So I feel like you're kind of taking something out of the sea, carrying it with you. Maybe it's a fear, maybe it's a worry about nurture or care or your safety. And it's like through the dream getting a little bit smaller and smaller, but it doesn't feel like you felt very good after the dream. You were kind of like, what is
Well,
scabs?
he never got them off by the end of the
Mm-hmm.
dream. It was like in the middle of the process. So I kind of woke up like feeling like I still had things like clamped on my
Attached to
feet.
you.
Yeah,
Oh,
which
so
is
terrible.
But yeah, I think that I'm glad that I brought this one up, because there's something about, you've kind of made these beautiful points about this Saturn element in Pisces, and this kind of control situation of like, I need to walk and I need to go. And there's also something about the horseshoe crab being really wild in the ocean, in the unconscious, kind of primordial, and it gets almost like more tame. And then I'm in a car, and then there's one in like a little shell, which are cute and don't really scare me that much, and so there's something that's more, I can look at it,
domesticated.
digestible, about it too, that I'm taking away.
Yeah, horseshoe crabs are probably very ancient. I've never thought about that before, but they're like, they've got to
Anytime
be
we went
really
to the
old.
zoo and they're like, touch this, I was like, absolutely not. Why would I do that? This does not look like it wants to be pet.
They probably can't even feel it. It's like an exoskeleton. They probably they're just like, what is my life? I hate
horrible.
everything.
I know you've been in that same room at the Bronx Zoo where they put you in the little tank thing, and they're like,
touch
that. Yeah, it's horrible. I hated that place so much. I was like, I want to go home.
Funny.
Yeah. So I think that there's something for me to continue to reflect on here about those themes. Really like the idea of Saturn and Pisces, as I said. And then also this kind of like getting, farther away from that primordial water and that unconscious and more into like my day world and how I'm taking it away, taking it with me. I really like that idea too. There might be something that wants to attach as well that I'm seeing as an invasion that maybe isn't that bad. That might be something
that feels very
well.
potent.
Yeah.
Yes.
Especially with wasps coming at me a couple days later. But well,
that's so
that
crazy.
one's for my analyst.
That one's for my analyst.
Really?
It's
My
a
analyst is
Medusa
French,
dream.
so.
It's an algal dream.
Bugs. No, thank you.
That's so crazy.
Well, thanks for listening to my crazy dream.
I love to.
I think we did good work on the witch today and crabs. And thanks everybody for listening. Also, I wanted to mention that if you're really interested in the witch and you want to continue diving into her, if you do end up getting that seminar that I have on my website, which you can find at persephonesister.com/seminars, there is an attached reading list that comes with that, with a lot of resources that you can dive into learning more about the witch archetype. So that might be something that you're interested in.
Cool.
All right, everyone. Thank you for joining. And in our next episode, we're also going to stay with our little spooky theme. So meet us there and we'll see you soon.
Stay tuned. Be scared. See you next time.
Bye. Thank you for joining us in our conversation today.
Please consider supporting the podcast by leaving a review and following Soror Mystica wherever you listen.
You can also become a more active supporter and a member of the Soror Mystica community by joining our Patreon.
If you have a symbolic experience that you'd like to share with us for the podcast, you can tell us all about it at sorormysticapodcast.com.
The music for this podcast is written and performed by me, Mariana Lewis, with special thanks to Stefan Lewis. You can connect with both Christina and myself on Instagram and get to know our work by clicking on the links in the show notes.
As the alchemical motto goes, as above, so below, as within, so without.
May this ancient wisdom continue to guide you deeper.
Until next time, take good care.